As a brittle offering, redemption rarely ever tempts the masses. It is a fragile commodity, and often its arc, as expressed through a narrative of rebrand in media, in celebrity, in literature, is a reliably high-risk, low-return formula. The culture seldom ever bites, but I bit, and obviously you did too if you are watching this video. Hi, I'm Catherine. If you don't know me, this is one of the more impromptu, informal types of videos. I don't usually make chatty type videos, but again, it is unplanned because there was cultural bait, and so naturally, I bit. I'm so glad though that you could make it here or make it back from wherever it is on the internet that you happened to drop in from.
What made you choose Islam? I didn't. I am a human with very limited power and awareness, but I have learned that God selects who he wills for his mercy. I have profited off my body, beauty, antics, often drunken, giving myself to the world, hoping for something back, wondering why I'm feeling empty, comfortable in my misery because I have known no other way. Mountains were moved in my life.
The bait presents itself, specifically the story advertises itself, and pertaining to this discussion, indeed, the hoe wants to pray. A wave of public personas find themselves attempting to redeem themselves through some form of religious saintlyhood. Clearly, because this is so controversial, not everyone is able to digest the promise of that redemption without suffering the nausea of their own contempt. Not contempt for the prayer in and of itself, but for how immodestly and ironically that prayer seems to be monetized as their redemption arc becomes the subject of public indulgence. Like some of their critics might say, every other part of themselves in recent past. So, what exactly is this video all about? Well, the public response to Mia Khalifa, Nala Ray, Blac Chyna's appeals to saintlyhood is, to me, absolutely fascinating. As well also as Ariana Grande's persona as she adopts a less aggravating, more refined disport after, yes, an infidelity scandal, but also her return to musical theatre as of her latest project as of filming this video.
I think it was the Pope at the time was like totally homophobic and totally not a fan of women at all. Or like also like SpongeBob or Harry Potter, and I was like, nah, this, I can't do this.
And I said, listen, is there any possible world we could just like make it a little bit less Arctic? And they made it.
You're welcome to go and check out my analysis on the 1995 book. It is disturbing, it is not for children, but I do think that it provides a lot of interesting context. The good witch's argument for her own incontinence, and specifically a strategic sexual over-availability, seems to be, at least in the eyes of her critics, her most damning admonition. But even as she returns to some appearance of saintlyhood and blamelessness, the audience still questions her performance, as they should. Why is she doing it? At what cost to her genuineness is she doing it? How, do we as the audience test her conversion? In my personal estimation, I think one of the first measures of genuineness is desperation. It strikes me specifically that someone would implore the security of an entity that less and less of the world recognizes, respects, and more importantly in 21st century ideology, see as threatening to autonomy of thought. You know that I am obviously talking about organized religion. Prayer honestly strikes me as desperate because it appeals to immaterial security where most of modern intellect discredits that effort, especially academic intellect.
Have you seen Britney Renner of all people posting videos in hijab after supposedly converting to Islam? Alhamdulillah, right? I wish. All I see are comments questioning if she's a Muslim or not, judging her, claiming that she's using Islam for publicity or
if right now I could guarantee you the security of a prayer versus the security of $10 million dropped into your account right now, right this second, I can estimate what most people would reasonably choose, and that is just my point. Material security is universally recognized, which is why, to me, sudden immaterial interests are so radical, are so desperate. They are diagnostic of extreme shifts in thought. And that radical shift in thought points me uniquely to a human being's desperation. So you might tell me, Catherine, I've been listening to you for long enough. Now make it stick. Desperation for what exactly?
Because anybody who would say, she's just changing for publicity. Is this a scam? Is this real?
Nobody needs publicity when you're already Blac Chyna. You just walk outside.
Talk the talk.
If I believed, and sorry, we're a little bit closer to the camera, but if I believe that their stories were as shallow as their critics argue, which I simply don't, I would tell you that they are desperate for husbands who will value them beyond their physicality. To variable degrees, I think that is somewhat true, but I don't think it's the full truth. You guys all know that I don't like underestimating human complexity. I think that there is a danger in that. People aren't just automatic idiots because you can't fathom how they arrived at one end of the river and you are backing off at the other end of the bank. I think it is important to understand how and why, people came to the strange and perplexing conclusions that they come to. So what strikes me as significant at the very least is that all of these figures have had their past stained by some form of molestation or abuse within some egregious capacity within their sexually formative years.
I'm going to share something really deep that I've never talked about, but I do feel comfortable now after I've kind of gone through therapy. And so my introduction into sex was when I was 13. I was molested by this person who my parents let into our home.
I feel this consistency across these figures not to be negligible. They know what it means to be, like many of us, honest victims of society's failure. Specifically, they know what it means to be part of a transaction, to be the humanity exchanged for the sake of someone's material pleasure. I think all of us do, many of us do. Especially if you're a people pleaser. I honestly believe that it could be anything on the plate of exchange. It could be your intelligence, it could be your work ethic, it could be your patience, and it could absolutely be. We have in the world, in the global economy, exploiting strategies of some asset that a human being could bring to society. We have exploiting strategies of an asset that a woman could bring to society. And I think therein exists, through other people's validation, the opportunity to redeem the invaluable respect for a humanity that was so inexcusably failed for in the past. But it is a dead mission, at least certainly in my experience. Most people's appreciation for your humanity is limited to the extent that they can exploit its complexity. Doesn't matter whether it's your body, your kindness, your work ethic. I don't think society cares. And I think it's the reason the poorest, the loneliest, forgotten individuals of society are identified on that level, because their assets to be absorbed by society are slim to none. They've got nothing much to offer in the eyes of the rest of the world. Anyway, this realization dawns upon the hoe, the good witch, that your exploitative value goes only as far as your, and excuse my French, your people are really terrible at consistently valuing something. And I think on the most basic level, it extends even to people, even to the relationships that do matter. Think marriage. I don't think as human beings that we are naturally consistent. That's why I think discipline is such a virtue. And it's so, I think, soul crushing to realize that about people, because consistency is most of what we need to feel like we matter to people. The self-professed hoe, the good witch or whatever, I think finds themselves at the desperate extremity that something beyond people, something fundamentally divine, must be satisfactorily redemptive of the humanity that no one genuinely valued of them in their past. I often wonder why it's so necessary that something external, that someone else imposed that value, why people struggle to independently love themselves through and out of an unfairness committed by some external party. For example, as necessarily skeptical but also fascinated I am with a figure like Nala Ray, I do have to acknowledge that her father did pressure her in the beginning to remain exploiting herself sexually because he benefited financially, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth from her lifestyle. He didn't want her to leave. And as a woman, as someone who is privileged to have a father who has always been very close to me and very protective of me, knowing for myself what would traumatize the framework of my religious beliefs, my sexual beliefs, my distrust of men in general. I'm not distrusting of men, but I know how that would influence that. And the one paternal entity who is at the very least legally accountable for protecting me, from who in this world I can't physiologically protect myself from because I'm a woman, because I'm built different. Anyway, knowing all of the above, and that he would rather be complicit in monetizing the value of my sexual assets, like that would... I don't know if I could recover from that. Speaking as a woman, speaking as a daughter, I know that would really mess with me. And on top of all of that mess, her father was a pastor.
My dad, however, was a very different story. My dad encouraged me to stay on OnlyFans. But for me, I was paying him. I was giving him money every month. Finally decided to follow Christ. I called my dad. My husband was right next to me. And I was like,
hey dads, I'm getting off of OnlyFans, like blah, blah, blah. I was so excited. He was like, well, why don't you just stay on another year and a half and like make more money and, like settle yourself in? Cause it's really expensive right now. And I'm like, did you really just tell me to stay on OnlyFans?
But again, as an adult, you are responsible for your own decisions. And Nalare's ideological pivot is extreme to me. To recidive to the former religious principles of an apparent hypocrite. And I use that harsh a word deliberately because in the eyes of her critics, it's not a naive return to the cultic religious safety of your childhood. It is corruptive of every effort in the wake of your rebrand, and it is recidivism because that relapse is seemingly incurable for how obstinate the reformed saint has become in their decision. Every critic on, either side of the debate is, I hate it, and I don't want to mischaracterize this because there's not always a conversion fixed by some form of religious security. The revised set of standards they now espouse just has to be adjacent to conservatism, whether it be Islam, whether it be Christianity, it really does not matter. It just has to be ideologically inharmonious with what they were previously known for. And offensively so, to the extreme. That extreme is suspicious. And I think everyone, especially so if you've presented this redemption arc in public view, has the right to interrogate it. That ease of pivot is suspicious, and I think the natural public assumption is that ease is possible because there is some hypocrisy there. It is unfortunately, I think, easier to be hypocritical than to dismantle your entire worldview. Unlike the traumatic context to most of these good witches, reformed saints, however it is you want to call them, their redemption arc is not underexposed, it is overexposed. You really do not have to dig very far to hear the stories of their now, and you cannot convince me that, the public context to their redemption arc does not have some parasocial benefit. To the anchoring of a new brand, monetizing a different type of publicity is valuable. But again, I would still argue that it is radical. Why? Because for once, the asset that they are explicitly selling is a set of reformed principles, not an explicit indulgence of explicitness. Again, I think redemption to them in the sense means being valued, known, and respected for the values, for the principles that compose their personhood, as opposed to the parts that compose their personhood. Yet there remains a need to redeem society to principles, to values rather, that aren't fundamentally maladaptive, self-destructive, and perpetuating recycling of the inexcusable exploits to people's humanity. I can empathize with the fact that, and now I'm just opinionating, but I can empathize with the fact that there is a tension that every convert navigates, a turbulence in their strain to return to a persona that they themselves can respect, and a persona that is respectable to those external people who observe that transformation. However, and when this does happen, does that mean we just excuse their clear exploitation of sacred religious principles to defend unacceptable behavior? No, absolutely not. But do we tell them to quote unquote go back to where they came from for how suspicious we are of their genuine redemption? I think that as human beings, I certainly am, I think that we are stabilized by characters of immutable depravity or goodness. The incurable hypocrite, the relatable saint, good, evil. I think you get the point. Because their monodimensionalism makes them consistently condemnable or favorable for anything it is that they do. Complexity in the transformation of a human character from reprobate to saintly is acceptable to the extent that their measured goodness after their stated reform is satisfactorily atoning of their past, in the court of public opinion, in the court of personal opinion, in the court of cultural opinion, ideological opinion. And furthermore, I think that it is terribly suspicious and unhealthy for someone's redemption arc, for someone's transformation arc to be that of public consumption. It need not be a public witness, simply because I think that the public is too divorced from the intimate reality of the person's intricate life, of the person's thought life, to appreciate the context of public blunders when their transformation is expressly nonlinear, is offensively nonlinear. And so their motivations for self-redemption can only really be functions of our own suspiciousness as the public. Like I said, monodimensional characters are importantly stabilizing, but also they are importantly predictable. This preference aligns with the cognitive bias, which I could admit that I do have. It's called essentialism, where people essentially just essentially, where people believe that other people have unchanging essences about them, and these essences define them. Once someone is deemed a villain or a reprobate or a saint, it becomes difficult to accept their transformation in either direction, because it disrupts the mental framework that allows us to make sense of their future behavior. Other thing is that I think that there also exists an exhaustive property to offense, and sometimes jealousy for witnessing a redemption undeserved. I'm also, and probably naively, convinced that hopelessness in the progressive redemptiveness of anything, life circumstances, politics, health, but especially so human character, lends to a cynicism, a pragmatism about life that is so often deemed as praiseworthy. But I often find that my skepticism is only as true as my exposure to the human being. I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm speaking mostly to myself. The idea of a hoe or a witch redeeming themselves often speaks to a return to more historically palatable standards. And these words, hoe and witch, they are deliberately offensive. They are deliberately meant to make the person feel shame. But I think the question is whether those revised standards in the court of public opinion, that is, in the court of ideological opinion, are redeemable enough to atone for their past actions and their current mistakes as they make them. And people's complexity in navigating their own redemption, it lends to the belief that they are not believable. Honestly, in my personal experience, and I'm young, I'm stupid, I don't know anything, but in my personal experience, most of them aren't. Most of them aren't to be believed, but it doesn't mean none of them are. I fully appreciate that my bias in always, or at least trying to be sympathetic to certain optimism, is not popular. It is not always realistic. Dismal realities sell. But the pragmatic lens through which they are engineered doesn't always mean that they are true. They are just accidentally exploiting of your frustration. I know, because when I rant, I get more views. But I don't demonize a set of beliefs just because someone fumbles the way that they should be practically and immediately applied into their lives. Especially when I believe, and my bias is that I believe that that particular set of beliefs is restorative. That is my bias, and so that is probably why I've taken the approach that I have today. Even after, yes, myself, I've been hurt by men, I've been hurt by women, but for whoever it is that I'm hurt by, I will always try to be optimistic about their word. Hey, I've changed. I don't subscribe to that lifestyle anymore. Or I'm not like them. But I will try my best to believe them. I think not even necessarily the danger, but in what you rob yourself of in subscribing to different forms of essentialism is, specifically as expressed by the more critical front of this phenomenon, is that believing in the irredeemability of any group in society as extended to the irredeemability of the personhoods that compose that group means that there are less entities in this life that you can invest in. You cannot invest in any institutions, in any ideas, or persons too irredeemable to restore to certain purpose, because most of them are pretty bad. You cannot invest in the potential for purpose within your own life, especially so in the context of irredeemable people, and so even that erodes. Which is why I don't say it's like a danger. Like, I'm not trying to scare you into not subscribing to essentialism in certain aspects. It's not like a doomsday prophecy. It's just my opinion. I just feel that there is a loss. There is something that you rob yourself of, because no entity, even in the form of a person, is whole in however it is that they advertise themselves. They are only as true to what they advertise as what you believe of them. That certainly includes myself. The reason I'm I'm taking the perspective that I am is because I'm really trying to be cautious, to be not so bothered by their being given a second chance when they probably don't deserve it, that the net positive of whatever principles absorbed into public opinion with restorative function are invaluable to me. I can't not acknowledge that value. And again, like full transparency, I just don't know how to quantify someone's worthiness when I don't know them, I think, as well as I should. And please let me know in the comments where you guys fall on this. But I truly don't know. That doesn't mean I won't judge. But most people, especially public figures, don't deserve the benefit of the doubt when you look into how they really live their lives. I can say that I don't deserve most of the grace that has been given me, most of the patience that has been given me. And I don't think that there is anything, especially when it comes to my loved ones, there there's just so much that I cannot realistically atone for. No matter what I do, I didn't deserve the benefit of the doubts that have just been sort of handed to me. But I think the more we limit what we can and should invest in, the more inclined we become to a dissatisfied pragmatism. Not because we shouldn't be discriminatory in what we invest in, we absolutely should be. We absolutely do need to be judgmental to an extent, but because when anyone with common sense looks at the world, not much tempts us to hope, to security, to lasting value, because everything and everyone has a context to their behavior that makes them look awful. I think the more we limit with cynicism what we can and should invest in, the more inclined we become to a dissatisfied pragmatism, not because we shouldn't be discriminatory in what we do invest in. I believe that judgment is necessary. We need to be circumspect in who we endorse and what we invest in. But because I think when anyone with common sense kind of looks at the world, there is not much that tempts us to hope, to security, to lasting value, because everything and everyone has a context to them, to their behavior, to their existence that makes them just look awful. So why give these women, for whatever it is that they are asking for, husbands, marriage, publicity, when they don't deserve it? Why give anyone with an essential property of depravity what they don't deserve? Because that is all an unfortunate society like ours has to offer. Potential to be restored to something better, and that potential is of course what we make of our cynicism and of our judgment. We can't afford to dismiss with judgment for the sake of indiscriminate, callous optimism either. We can't afford to be stupid and happy and just believing of everyone when they say that they've changed. But I'm more likely to choose to believe people. And I don't care whether you are religious or not. You need to judge, you need to discriminate in order to have standards. Because when we don't judge as human beings, when we don't discriminate as human beings, too much of the inexcusable becomes tolerated. And really, as human beings, in my opinion, we need to be more than tolerated. Human beings need to be brought to account for every hypocrisy and brought to account for every step in the right direction. Because that tells them that we value them for more than just their performance, for more than just their effort, but for the humanity that informs that effort. And I genuinely feel like we have forgotten how to do the latter. That's why so many people feel like no matter what they do, to whatever controversial or extreme end, it will never be enough. It will never be enough. And I think it can be if we let it be. If we allow that effort the space to breathe. I fully appreciate that my perspective is sometimes it is offensively optimistic. That might just be because I'm too inexperienced, or maybe it's because I'm a woman, and so my sympathy towards women who, at least on the surface, are trying to do good with what they've learned about their past mistakes, right? I obviously have a soft spot for that, so I just want you to be, even as you listen to me opinionate, I just want you to be aware of that bias if you haven't, if you haven't picked up on it already. I am optimistic, obviously, but I think that's just because it's the only perspective I can afford to have in a world suffocated with irredeemabilities in people, in institutions, in ideas. I'm not going to sell you something dismal. I'm not going to sell you a reality that I myself can't even afford to believe in. To exploit, your emotional investment, your frustration, and necessary judgment, by the way, of a redemption arc that is only as true as your or my proximity to it, which I know, like in my case, is not very close. Thank you so much for joining me. I would love to know what you think about this entire subject. The opinions aren't always very diverse. So again, I really want to know what other people have to say about it. But for now, I think I'll see you hopefully very soon. You take care. Again, thank you so much for giving me your ear. Thank you so much for giving me your time and for sticking it through till the end if that is what you decided to do. So I will see you hopefully very soon. You take care and goodbye.